The 7/7 attacks were the worst single terrorist atrocity on British soil, killing 52 and injuring over 770 others.
One of many victims left with life-changing injuries was Dan Biddle, who locked eyes with bomber Mohammed Sadiq Khan before being thrown from the tube carriage and losing both his legs.
Dan owes his life to fellow passenger Adrian Hiley, who administered life-saving first aid before going back into the tunnel to help save 12 other casualties.
Before we meet them both, let's take a look at the Netflix documentary marking 20 years since that fateful day.
That day, I'm running late. I'm standing on a train.
I just happened to see the number 30 bus and I just got straight on it.
Going to work, get on Circle Line. I could feel somebody staring at me. Just see his hand go, and then...
We're getting reports of a series of incidents in London.
You look through the windows and you can see there's people on the track. Then you start hearing the screams.
I was crawling through bodies just trying to escape.
I can't imagine what was going through his head other than literally hate for every single one of us.
We certainly didn't know who we were looking for.
But we had to investigate not only who was involved in the actual attack, who else knew about it.
There was a fury and a sadness. So many lives were lost.
Our anxiety was that this was the first and there would be other attacks that would come.
And Dan and Adrian join us now. Good morning.
Good morning
to both of you. Dan, if I could first of all start with you, if you could tell me a little bit about what your life was like before 7/7 and the terror attacks.
Yeah, I was just a normal 26-year-old young man. I worked in the construction industry, very sporty, very active. So really just like anybody of that sort of age, I enjoyed socialising with my friends, and as I say, I played a lot of sport. I had a job that I loved and kind of really breaking through into the construction industry. So in my mind, the life that I was looking forward to leading was kind of mapped out in front of me. But then obviously that happened and everything changed.
And it's, I mean, it just changed within a blink of an eye as well. I mean, it was just an ordinary day for you, first of all. What were you doing at the time and what was in the lead up?
So I was on my way to work.
Yeah.
My morning of the 7th of July was kind of like I call it the sliding doors moment, because there's lots of incidents that morning where if I do something different, I'm not on that train. And it just kind of all culminated with the final kind of mess up was I missed my stop, so I shouldn't have even been on the train. And when the bomb was detonated, it was between Edgware Road and Paddington, and I would have been getting off at Paddington. So it was kind of like all these sliding door moments put me in that place at that particular time. And it was just absolute carnage.
The documentary on Netflix is an extraordinary thing to watch, to be reminded of those moments 20 years ago, and also to get firsthand from you all of what you went through, Dan. And you're so honest about that process and that experience of being on that carriage and then locking eyes with the bomber in your carriage. What was that moment like when you think back to it?
It was really strange because I was stood up and he was sat next to me, so we wasn't probably no more than about 6 inches apart. And as the train pulled out of Edgware Road Station, I could feel somebody staring at me. And I kind of looked round, and this young gentleman sitting next to me was like staring up. I didn't really think anything of it. People watch on the tube every day, so I didn't really think too much of it. At the corner of my eye, I see him lean forward and look along the carriage to the back end of the carriage we was in, and then he started to stare at me again. And by this point, he was getting a little bit uncomfortable. So I was just about to, I kind of looked at him, locked eyes with him, was just about to say, like, well, what are you looking at, mate? What's your problem? And I just see him reach into the bag, and then that's when absolute hell was unleashed.
And when you say absolute hell was unleashed, what do you remember about that split second and about that moment?
Once I see his hand move towards the bag, the next thing was just a brilliant white flash. I've never seen anything as bright as that in my life.
Yeah.
Then it was a huge amount of heat that something I've never experienced. I always describe it, once I see his hand move towards the bag, the next thing was just a brilliant white flash. I've never seen anything as bright as that in my life.
Yeah.
Then it was a huge amount of heat that something I've never experienced. I always describe it as if you get off a plane abroad and you take that first intake of breath and it's that really dry, arid heat. It was like that, but 100 times hotter. And then just like a huge amount of pressure that actually blew me through the carriage doors into the tunnel wall, and then I landed in the crawl space between the tunnel wall and the track. And at first I thought there'd been either a train collision or an electrical explosion because of the white flash. And I didn't realise how seriously injured I was at that very second. It was only when I moved my arms and hands were on fire that I realised actually this is a bit more than I first realised. And then I made the mistake of trying to look around, and that's when I saw the first dead body, and it was just absolute hell on earth after that.
Adrian, you were on the same train. You were further down the train. What are your memories of that day?
Well, I was actually in the third carriage. I remember the explosion going off, like Dan says, this white light, and in my memory said that there was flames coming down the side of the carriage where I was standing. I got knocked around, broke some glass. I had a dislocated shoulder, some broken ribs, and glass in my head where I'd hit the side panel and broken. It was no one actually knew what was going on, and I think eventually once everything upon the dust had settled, people started realising, and then there were these almighty screams from all over, not just from Daniel, but everywhere. There was confusion, there was panic underground.
Yeah, and then you made the decision to run towards what was
But with Danny, I was speaking to Danny between the two carriage doors, between the third and the fourth carriage. I was talking to him. That's the only place I could actually get communication with Danny and just find out and reassure him that I was coming to try and help him. I made my way down the tunnel, down the tube to the rear of the tube. Got out by a gentleman there by the name of Lee, who opened the doors, and he and I walked towards the oncoming train from Paddington. And I clearly remember, and it's something that will sit with me forever, is walking towards that light, that train coming towards you. There were figures on the floor. You couldn't make out. You knew they were male or female on the floor, but they were charred. They were charcoal, and that's one of the hardest decisions I've had to make, is saying, is there anything I can do to help these people? But at that time, my concentration was trying to get to Danny.
Because you could hear him.
I could hear him, and we were talking to each other as I was walking towards him, just trying to ascertain where he was. And I remember climbing underneath the train, the Edgware Road train, to get to the wall. And I remember putting my hands down and climbing over the tracks. And it wasn't water you putting your hand in, it was mush.
Yeah.
And I remember coming out in a bit of light and looking at my hands and I'm thinking, this isn't this isn't something that should be there. And I made my way to Dan, and that's where we sort of met up, if you want.
And when you got to Dan, you've been a medic. You were a medic, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So when you looked at Dan, did you instantaneously go, "This guy's in a lot of trouble"? And what did you do? 'Cause you saved his life.
I think Dan in himself saved his own life. You know, it was the determination of Dan. Dan's an amazing gentleman, an amazing man. You know, he's got the drive, but it was to just be there with him. When I found Danny, I didn't actually see the full extent of his injuries. I saw his head was cut open. He had facial injuries, and his hands were charred. But once I'd removed the door off Danny, I saw the full extent of his injuries, and that for me was a moment where you think, oh, okay, this is just stepped up a level. I'd been a medic before, started at school in South Africa and Zimbabwe, and then in the military, and you know. There's that train that just kicks in, and you get on with the job, and you try as best you can.
But getting on with the job and try the best you can. I mean, it was. Explain. He's being sort of very humble about this, Dan. But what did he actually have to do?
I mean, this is what makes Adrian so remarkable. Is he's so matter of fact about it, and he ran headlong into everything that people were trying to run away from. And I've always said I'd like to think I could have been as brave as that if I wasn't injured. But after seeing what I saw, I don't think I could have. Basically, Adrian, when he found me, he said 3 things to me, which I'm never going to forget. The first thing he said to me was, "I've been in this situation before and never lost anyone," which was a little bit unsettling at first, I've got to admit. He then asked me if there was anything that he didn't want to be catching, because I had obviously massive open wounds. And then he said to me, "Brace yourself, Dan, this is really going to hurt." And I thought, I've been set on fire. I've got all these injuries that I kind of know what's happened. What can you possibly do to me that could hurt anymore? And one thing Adrian isn't is a liar, because he basically had to push his hand into what was left of my left leg, find my femoral artery and pinch it shut to stop me bleeding to death. You think that he didn't want to be catching, because I had obviously massive open wounds. And then he said to me, "Brace yourself, Dan, this is really going to hurt." And I thought, I've been set on fire. I've got all these injuries that I kind of know what's happened. What can you possibly do to me that could hurt anymore? And one thing Adrian isn't is a liar, because he basically had to push his hand into what was left of my left leg, find my femoral artery and pinch it shut to stop me bleeding to death.